basically they're funding us to increase our patrols. So it's about being intelligence-led and data-driven about where our hotspots are, and that relates, as Sophie again alluded to, most serious violence and antisocial behaviour. Hotspot policing is designed to reduce most serious violence, but it would make sense if officers are on high visibility foot patrols that they deal with antisocial behaviour as well, because they're kind of come hand in hand. There'll be antisocial behaviour that we're happening across. In the first year, when we delivered it, we had 36 hotspots across Dorset. It was a lot to try and manage operationally, and we've reduced them to 18 across the force for this year. So it started Hotspot Action Fund for year 2, which we know internally as Operation Track, started on the 1st of April 2025. And in Bournemouth Town Centre, there are 6 Hotspot Action Fund hotspots, and we have to patrol them in doses, if you like. So they need 20-minute patrols. The national sort of international studies into it. It comes from something called the Coper Curve theory, which talks about preventing crime by something called the Guardian effect. So our presence is deterring crime, in short, because the public are looking at us thinking the police are there, we won't commit crime. It can cause, on occasions, dispersals to other areas, but we haven't seen too much of that, and that's the same picture nationally. In Dorset, we're incredibly lucky. We've got, and I don't want to steal his thunder, a gentleman called Chris Collins, who's an internal member of our IT department, and he has, in his own time, designed a hotspot app, so officers can use it on their phone. I've used it myself. It's phenomenal. I think it's ultimately probably worth a lot of money, but he's done it for the good of the cause and try to make people safer in the public. So when we do track patrols, we had a bit of a clunk. I won't go through all the way of how we recorded it, but we basically have to deliver that data to the Home Office, and then the Home Office check the numbers and they give us money back to fund the patrols, if that makes sense. It's funded partly by business as usual and partly via overtime. But because of this app, I can instantly get data up. So I've just run the data from the 1st of July to the 23rd of September. So that's to date. And I can tell you that in the Lower Gardens hotspot specifically, there's been 413 foot patrols that relate specific to that location. I can tell you that the average time of those patrols is 41 minutes in length. I can tell you that 1,183 members of the public have been engaged with at those hotspots. What we were finding in year 1, and I'll be open about it, there were so many hotspots for the officers to try and get round, they were just focusing on the patrols. But what I wanted to include this year, and this is beyond what the Home Office have asked for, is engagement with the public that lasts more than 30 seconds. So not a simple hello. This is about increasing trust and legitimacy in policing. So we want those engagements, we want those proper conversations. Are you local? Are you visiting? What do you think of Bournemouth? Is there anything we can help you with? Is there any intelligence or information you want to share with us? And over time, what that will do, it will increase trust and confidence in policing, and it will allow us to obtain intelligence from the public. Because not everyone's going to ring in everything they've seen. I've seen somebody dealing drugs on this particular street corner. That's really valuable intel, and that can feed back into all this data that we deliver. So this is very much all about problem-oriented policing. It's really, really valuable. And in a lot of the conversations that I have with the Home Office and my partners in the region, so Avon and Somerset, Wiltshire, etc., Gloucestershire, we are leaders in this because of the app that Chris Collins has designed. Moving on from members of the public engaged with just over that time frame, there was 148 premises visited. So although it covers primarily the Lower and Central Gardens, there is the section in the square. So that's where officers have gone in, because that's a key part of it. And the College of Policing tells us that it wants us to be visible, observant and engaging. It's really important. We can be seen. That's why in Dorset we wear high vis. Observant of problems and people that are potentially going to be victims of crime, and engaging again with businesses and the public. In that time frame, there were 71 antisocial behaviour incidents dealt with. So they weren't essentially something that's been called in. It could be anything. And we've got a whole range of powers that we deal with in policing, but it could be anything from a simple conversation, someone heard swearing loudly, that would class as dealing with an antisocial behaviour incident. A fight that might be brewing, we can go and have a conversation with those people. We don't always have to go up through the scale of the powers, if you're with me. 18 pieces of intelligence were submitted, 9 arrests were made, 9 Section 35 dispersal notices, so us telling people that they have to leave for up to 48 hours a particular area. It's just a piece of antisocial tool. It's the least intrusive means of dealing with things sometimes, and it often, well, 99.9% of the time solves the issue. There were 5 stop searches conducted, 2 community resolutions, which are dealing with first offences or lower level offences. It's important to note they can only be issued to adults, and 2 blades were seized, edged weapons. Were there any questions on the data? Because I'm aware that's a lot of information. But for the record, if anybody wants this information at any point, whilst I can't give you the specifics of the hotspots, I can refer to where they are, but I can't give you the specific geographic fencing until the project's nearly done, because what I don't want to do is impact. If you're a drug dealer, you'll just move to another location, if that makes sense. So I need to preserve the integrity of the map. But were there any questions on the app?
Well, first, thank you so much for presenting all of that. I guess no questions on the data, but I guess in what way do you feel that us as a committee could assist you? I mean, obviously we've looked at lighting. I've noticed nothing's on the report card for lighting, so that probably needs to work its way through the system. But how do you think we could assist you in terms of the things that we do in the lower gardens to improve on that?
I think the board's been really helpful to us previously. You know, if we've come and said we've identified an area that we need cameras, or we've identified upgrades that we might want around lighting, or we've done things around making sure the toilets are accessible, and we've had members of staff accessing those toilets and sort of opening those toilets and closing those toilets and being a visible presence. I think there's been quite a lot of things that have sort of come through the board in many years now, where we've made a recommendation and the board have been supportive of that. Obviously, there's planning to consider within a number of these elements as well. But I think the board's always been really helpful when we've had environmental things that we want to change in the gardens as far as we reasonably can. So I don't think from a sort of designing out crime perspective at the moment there's anything additional that we would want to bring to the board. I think there's some key points about lighting that we probably want to take away to the street lighting team to make sure that they can check which lights are out, and it might be that they want to sort of bring something back, and I don't know if there's anything that you want to add on the lighting point, Kate.
Not directly because my colleague's not here, but we can absolutely take back the street lighting requests or reports through to colleagues in those services. Councillor Williams may be able to answer this point because he's probably got the history on it, but my understanding is that in following the last master plan that was done for Lower Central Gardens, which dates back to I think about 2010, there was an upgrade programme to the lantern lights that feature through the gardens that was completed, but they are lantern style lights rather than your high visibility lighting that I think maybe you may be referring more to. That said, the lantern style lights should be functioning, so if they're not, I'll certainly take that back to colleagues. And equally, the public can report those directly through using the Report It apps if at any time you do spot that any are out. But yeah, I don't know if Councillor Williams wants to add anything more on that one based on your knowledge.
Just to confirm, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
But the lights do need repairing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if they're reported, they'll be repaired. Sorry? Yes, yeah. So one other thing I was just going to cover off actually for the folk on the live stream, I think the sound dropped out for the first few minutes of that, so that's the reason. So if you couldn't hear, that was the reason behind that.
Just a question for the police. Yesterday I saw a group of what looked like homeless people drinking in the lower gardens, quite a large group of them. And obviously I wasn't going to go through the rigmarole of reporting it, but I assume that the police there would be a patrol along at some time, just as a normal course. But is that the kind of thing as well you would issue a dispersal notice for? Thank you.
Probably a joint point for us. So effectively, we've got Public Spaces Protection Order that covers the majority of BCP. It makes it an offence to fail to surrender alcohol when asked to do so by an authorised officer. So it's a BCP-owned piece of legislation, and an authorised officer is a police officer, PCSO, special constable, and a CSAS officer. We also have a range of officers in our seafront and parks teams that also have accreditation under the CSAS scheme. Effectively, what that does is look at anybody who is acting in an antisocial manner or likely to act in an antisocial manner, and officers will look to seize alcohol. Within the most recent PSPO review, because they have to be reviewed every 3 years, we also put dispersal clause within it. So that means now that any CSAS officer can also ask for a dispersal. It's slightly different to a police dispersal in the fact it doesn't have a power of arrest if somebody comes back into an area, but it gives us more tools to ask people to leave. So whereas Sophie mentioned the Section 35 dispersals, which is again same criteria, acting antisocially or likely to act antisocially, they can disperse for up to 48 hours. The same principles apply to the PSPO around alcohol consumption, and the same timeframes apply as well. So CSAS officers can also add those dispersals. And with the regular patrols that you've got from both teams, if there are instances of ASB in relation to street drinking, the teams will either look to confiscate or disperse as part of their normal business as usual.
Yeah, thanks for Sophie Williams. So we've gone from 36 to 18 hotspots from last year into this year. What's the criteria for harmonised?
So we assess it on data. So it will be if knife crime has been prevalent previously, if antisocial behaviour is too high for that hotspot, and most serious violence. So most serious violence is the main one that we use to pick our hotspots. But they had to, I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but it had to reflect an amount of knife crime locally, and we have seen massive reductions, because even though if you look at the two-edged weapons that were seized within the date range, whilst that ultimately sounds low, it's important to remember it doesn't mean they're being any less policed. We are still policing them, and if I would argue that from a problem-oriented policing perspective, that a reduction in those numbers is good, because it shows that the intervention is working, our presence is working, and we're not seeing so much of that crime data in that area, if that makes sense.
So potentially it could be a victim of its own success. So obviously everyone's out there, and then over time, if that actually disperses people elsewhere, places like the Gardens will lose its patrols because it will no longer be a hotspot because you're there, but then once you leave, it creates a vacuum again for that to come back. So I suppose it's just a way of how the funds have to be managed, I guess.
So with the SARA problem-solving plan, so that's scanning, analysis, and then responses, and then we assess how well it's gone. So because this problem-oriented policing is coming in for the long term now, and I'll talk to you in a second about how and why, it means that if there was another surfacing of problems, if you like, the scanning phase would pick that out again, and we could see that there's an issue there. So the Hotspot Action Fund, I believe, will completely conclude at the end of March 2026, so that the Home Office won't be funding anymore. But what we have got coming in is something called the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee, and that takes all of the excellent work from problem-oriented policing and keeps it in for the long term. So I've recently been away to the College of Policing and done a course of lessons that's been taught by them, by professors that have been working for them. So it's applying all of this problem-oriented policing, all of the academia behind it, what works. And it's not just in the UK that this stuff works. Any developed country, this stuff works the same. And it's in for the long term, absolutely. We wouldn't leave, if something's recurring again, then the scanning phase will identify it, and we'll reapply some kind of problem-oriented policing activity to prevent it.
What I'd probably add to that as well is the Bournemouth Town Centre, I wouldn't believe is ever not going to be a hotspot. So even if we didn't have op-track funding or or that reduced, we've still got neighbourhood policing teams, we've still got CSAS service at the moment, and those services will continue to proactively patrol in those areas. So even if it wasn't deemed a hotspot with this method of policing attached to it, things like Operation Fireglow are a neighbourhood policing operation. So that's been in place, and the neighbourhood policing patrols have been in place for a significant number of years, and they're not going to go anywhere. So realistically, there's still going to be patrols regardless of, the pockets of money that may come in from central government at any particular time.
So I think there's 3 points which Sarah raised, which we haven't covered. And the first one was it was dark on the entrance to the park, but I think that's the next item on the agenda with the signage. So maybe we cover it with that. The picnic in Delhi Avery, I guess those are probably planning issues. So you could add conditions onto planning for additional lighting if that was that would be appropriate. I guess that would be a solution to that. And then the toilets, I guess it's almost like a feedback. Yeah, go on.
I can come in on toilets. The public conveniences, you're correct, they're not open to the same hours that they have been in previous years, which was linked to seasonal response funding that has come to an end. So that was temporary enhanced funding that we had that ensured that we could have attendance on site for longer periods, but that was temporary funding that we don't have. So we are back to core opening hours, unfortunately, at that facility, unless future funding streams can be identified.
And would it be fair to say that when the toilets are open, that sometimes they can create a hotspot for antisocial behaviour?
Yes, they do suffer from ASB.
Any other questions?
I understand. Am I right in understanding that this is a board that is registered with the Charity Commission and has charitable status as?
Yeah. So yeah, there's different shareholders of the charity, but yes, we're essentially the board. The Lower Gardens are a registered charity. Yes.
Can you use that status to bid for extra funding?
It's quite hard to because of the differentiation between the charity trust and the trust board. Effectively, my understanding is we're a shareholder, and Lawrence will.
Yes, I've encountered this with the Russell Coates. If you're part of the council as well as a trust, and it's very difficult to get funding, you'd have to be an independent charity
Okay.
to get charitable funding.
Could I come in there? That said, we are officers within the Environment Directorate with colleagues from Cultural Services are looking at a heritage strategy for BCP, and Lower Central Gardens Trust would form potentially parts of that heritage strategy, which would then enable the council to look at going for further bids to enhance the gardens, depending on what a future master plan develops as part of that heritage strategy. So the idea will be a future board meeting for Martin Whitchurch, who's our Green Space Strategic Lead, and other colleagues to come forward to talk to the board about how we move forward with the heritage strategy for BCP and what sites across BCP form part of that strategy. I hope that helps.
So that sort of are we able to move? Is there anything that anyone want to propose off the back of that? Or maybe we'll propose something off the lighting in a second. So yeah, so basically, I think, in terms of, obviously there's quite a lot going on, and I think it is also about the reassurance for the public as well, because sometimes when you walk through a gardens, you don't necessarily have all of the statistics and the knowledge of everything that's sort of going on in the background. So if we're happy with that, do you want to move on to the verbal update on the bicycle signage and the lighting for the Lower Central Gardens?
Before we finish on the points that Sarah, yeah, maybe we can propose that we have a review of all these issues at our next meeting or a future meeting. Would that be appropriate to see if the situation has improved any with regard to lighting in particular in the gardens, so that we revisit it?
Do you have a seconder? I'll second that for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Is everybody happy with that? We review that, and when we need a date for review, otherwise it goes into the ether.
Whenever our next meeting is, or
Well, that's a budget meeting.
the one.
Yeah.
Chair, could perhaps we could have a email update on the lighting situation?
Yes, I'll take that away to the directorate that leads that, but absolutely.
Really, thank you ever so much for for coming in and presenting those. Obviously, Sarah as well, yeah, it's good to be able to revisit all of those within the context of the experiences of a user of the park. So, Kate, are you able to give the verbal report on the bicycle signage and the lighting?
I wasn't aware about lighting in addition, but the signage, absolutely. Following the walk around that the board did, we have raised a works order to have the surface signage refreshed at both entrances and exits to the garden. Obviously, it's been a really busy summer. It's not really been the best time to undertake those works, but they will be completed this autumn winter. We have just appointed a new street lining contractor. They started last week, so they're just working through a backlog of works. But just to confirm that a works order has been raised and it will be undertaken in due course.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for that. We've got a couple of residents who will be very pleased with that. Are there any other comments or questions from the remainder of the board? So basically, Jamie's got a proposition that that we treat the lighting separately to the SARA review. So we have a separate review for that. Yeah.
So essentially, what I was saying was the lighting being out is its own issue as opposed to the lighting in. So I think the original email from Sarah mentioned the lighting being out, which obviously has its own response to the idea of is the gardens well lit enough?
Okay.
Is what I was going at with when I said that the lighting wasn't the same as the lighting within the SARA review.
Okay.
So in the review we've said obviously the lighting's out and that's been reported and that needs to be done. And also what we just said in the previous item is that the amount of lighting in the gardens is going to be looked at as well. Is that what came out of that?
So in the spirit of partnership working, we can request what's called an environmental visual audit. We've done a number of them in the gardens over the years, but we can get a refreshed one, which will give recommendations on any improvements that may wish to be made. Obviously, there'll be a process to follow around that, but we can request that that's done and bring that back if that would be helpful.
That would seem very sensible if everybody's happy with that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Kate. So the next thing we're looking at is the Art and Makers Market, and we've got Amanda Barry to present the report on that.
Hi Chair, I could give an update on that. So the Art and Makers Market went out for tender in 2024, and that was with a view for an operator to take over the bookings and general maintenance of the space. No submissions were received at that time, so the operation continued in-house for May and for the start of the year. The council then received a proposal from an operator to run the market from June 2025, and given that we hadn't tendered out the space, it was agreed that there would be a trial period for a year and then from that trial period we'd then decide what happened from there and bring it back to the board. That included the operator taking the full responsibility of the site, including bookings, general maintenance, paperwork, marketing. A mid-year review of that operation is due in December, as per our agreement. So we'll be taking that forward. My understanding at the moment is that the operator is running the market every other weekend, and that's in the hope to build up a better increase in footfall, so that they can then go back to weekly operations. So that's the current status.
So, are there any questions from the board? Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So obviously we've had some email correspondence over this. So apologies if I draw on some questions from the correspondence. And so essentially, first of all, in terms of, I think what was being said is, well, what's just been mentioned is about this every other week, the opening of the market, and I feel like there's a slight issue there where obviously there was confusion when it did stay in house, and then there was like some changes to the arrangements for cars coming onto site to set up in the morning, and that sort of, I believe, discouraged some people from coming along and displaying their works. And then obviously we've had this issue around who can leave stuff, or now you can't leave stuff in the shed, and so it just sort of feels like we were in a position this time last year, probably when we were told about it, that this had to be done, but at the same time nothing fundamentally would change about it, and now it feels like a lot has changed. I know that's not on the officers sat here. I know that's probably to do with how the operators acting, obviously within their contract, but I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but it's a shame that we went from a place where just a nice little market was operating just on its own kind of thing, and up there and doing its own thing, and now it's like quite a big issue because, like I say, they've had to go to every other week, but it feels like that's just sort of come about through how that whole changeover process was handled and how they've gone on to handle it. And it's like, so they've taken data from previous years and said, okay, we need to do it bi-weekly until we get to a point of going to weekly again. And it just feels like sort of lots of things have been lost from that sort of artist walk. Yeah.
Lawrence.
Now, I'm not sure if I'm talking about the same thing, but the exhibition, is that what, yeah. That was 7 days a week at one point, not weekly or 2 weekly. It was for a while very, very well received by the public, and it was quite well supported by artists too. And it kind of, it's fallen away. I don't know why it's fallen away. It didn't ever make very much money for the council, I have to say that much. But it was something that people went to and enjoyed. I did. And I remember being invited there when I was Mayor of Bournemouth. And that was the beginning of when it was slipping away. And that was 2017. So we've gone from being 7 days a week, certainly in 2017, to what we have today, which is very sad, I think.
Do you want me to pick up on just something? So from the information that I've got today, in 2024, across going just on numbers, and then I'll just pick up on some of the other parts that we've been discussing. There was sometimes about 5 to 10 artist books in each day. Some days are only a couple of bookings. They currently have got 25 to 30 artists on a Saturday and about 10 to 15 on a Sunday. So they're trying to grow it back by, rather than, I think their thinking is if they have it more concentrated on one weekend, then they can grow it back across more. As I say, it is a trial, and part of that is there's various different areas that's got to be discussed in that review. In terms of the traffic that was brought up, sorry, I'm just trying to find my notes on, and there was the parking team did put some additional cones out there to stop, because I think people couldn't get in, to make sure that they could unload. As we've discussed in terms of the hut, it's 50% is used for the market under this operation and 50% for the catering concession that's there as well. And I know that we picked up that there's been some confusion in terms of what the operator said towards the artists and back, and we're picking that up with the operator to try and sort that out at the moment operationally.
Can I just come back? I know funding's an issue. It always will be. Have you considered approaching the Arts Council for a bit of funding? Because this is the sort of thing that they look quite keenly at. I know that as a previous member of the Arts Council.
It's not something we've currently done, but certainly something we can look into.
It's definitely worth a try. Yeah.
Jamie.
So just back onto the hut, if it's shown, I mean, because obviously there's a difference between crafters coming on and artists displaying artwork there, and from what I understand, it might well be starting to move towards being like a crafters market rather than an exhibition of artwork, and obviously artists selling that work. Is there any stipulation we can put on the use of the shed to allow for regular artists to store work there, because it is quite cumbersome, because that in itself is quite detrimental to people who've been regular showers. I know they've reported that was an issue of maybe people long-term storage there who don't attend. But is there anything that can be put in place to allow those who would attend regularly to keep their artwork there?
So it's something we'll have to obviously take back and discuss with the operator, and is already sort of work in progress to have those conversations. I think, again, my understanding is that some of it, like you say, was long-term artwork that was stored. They've, for the use of the space that they've got, there's only a certain amount of space, so it needs to be a conversation with the, whilst we're in this trial, with the operator, but something that my colleague who liaises with them is taking back to have that conversation to see what options there are. So I can't guarantee, but we're having the conversations to see what we can do.
Yeah, because just from my, obviously not having been in the shed or seen how that operates on the ground, it's just it seems a little bit strange that it's gone from a place where obviously people have done that for years, and then they've got 50% of the shed, and then they say you can no longer do that. I'm just wondering what they're using that shed for instead.
So my understanding, when this came over from environment to commercial operations, there was only 50% of the shed for the artist. There was the other 50% was for the concession, which is the continued basis. So the space hasn't reduced. The operator may have some more equipment. That I don't know the details of that without checking. But from when there was some long-term artwork which couldn't stay in there long-term without consistent bookings, but we're just trying to find out, following the email that you had sent, just exactly what they have got and what the options are.
That's great. It's, yeah, because like I said, just if they taken it on, even with 50% of the shed, I'm not quite clear on what they're actually using that 50% for. They're not actually facilitating the use of the market through some storage allowance. So I'm not sure. Like they might have additional stuff in there, but if they do, what they run in the market for, how are they run in the market then? If they've got extra stuff in there or new stuff in there that wasn't previously in there, so it's just like little things like that. Just
While Jamie turning back in, it's always great when members of the public come along. I realise you're from the Makers Market, is that right? Is there anything that you feel that you need to, well, I have to ask the board first before you're happy that the these members of the public tell us if there's anything they feel that that we should be looking at, or in respect of the Makers Market, in addition to obviously trying to get the additional slots in there?
do you want to come to?
Oh, yeah, I'll show you how it works, because I've completely messed with it.
Hi. It appears the information that you've been given is slightly incorrect. The art makers have never been able to have half the shed, because Picnic Deli have got 7 or 8 tenths of it, and there's very little room. We had our little space for the artists to keep their work. We would arrive in May and store our stuff right through till September, and we're able to do every weekend, which was wonderful. We turn up this year, and we're told we can't store our stuff there. So all the artists who kept their work there can no longer exhibit. And we are very upset about it.
The artists that were dependent on public transport or being relying on people to give them lifts, we're not all in the same age group there, and some people are disabled, and it's prohibitive if we can't use the actual storage space. And it was very, I mean, it was a bit like organised chaos before, but it worked. I mean, you know, I had a converted twin tub on wheels that I kept my pictures in and wheeled it back and forth to the space. I'm not as a regular attendee as Claire. But we seem to be put in a past tense now with the new management. We were told that the council had actually taken away the space from us. We felt there's been a huge number of conflicts online over the management of the space, and misunderstandings and misinformation and God knows what else. And we're not moving forward with it. In fact, the market already, before this takeover, was already in a perilous state anyway. I mean, we had to campaign to get renewal of the awnings, which were all in a bad state. That was achieved, thank goodness. That at least gave us shelter. We've had issues which came up earlier with the other lady, but she was focusing on the night time. Well, in fact, during the day, there's been safety issues there. And we haven't had any recourse for that. We've had people taking drugs behind the stands. We've had fights. We've had intimidating groups always behind the stands. It doesn't feel like it's become a safe area. I don't know what's happened of late with the group, the women that are running it now. But I, as a woman, one afternoon, I actually got stuck there because my husband couldn't pick me up because the buses and the roadworks were blocking the access. And it was getting towards 6 o'clock, and I thought, it's going to get dark. What am I going to do if I'm stuck down here with my artwork, which needs to be transported because the hut was locked? I would be vulnerable as a woman. And what I'd seen during the day, although we all coped with it as a group, whatever we saw, we tended to manage it. And you indeed do get, I'm sorry if I'm rambling on like this, totally uncoordinated. But, you know, we do get all comers down there. At one stage, it was more civilized. Since it's become quieter, we do tend to have vulnerable spots. Like, for example, when a group came down unannounced, took over a whole stand, set up themselves for a publicity campaign for, what was it?
I don't know, I don't remember that.
You weren't there?
Go back to the shed.
Oh, the shed. The shed. I know, the shed's so important, even though I'm not so reliant on it as other people, but I'm here because I see the problems that it's caused.
I know this must seem awfully minor to you.
Sorry?
But I'm saying it must seem minor to the council, but it's our life. We paint all the time. We have that nice opportunity to exhibit our work from May till September, And it's been my life for the last 9 years, and other people's for much longer.
50 years, one person.
Yeah.
She started exhibiting there at the age of 21 as a young artist, and she's still going strong,
Well,
you know.
yeah, except that she can't now.
It's
But what?
sorry, it's a fantastic. I mean, it is a fantastic thing within the garden, and actually, I think to some extent, it also although there is antisocial behaviour around, it also displaces antisocial behaviour around having it there. So, in the two issues seem to be that that there might be a disconnect between what we're being told about the sharing of the shed and what's happening in reality. So can we go back to the operator and ask them to check that?
Yeah, so there's two parts. I'll obviously speak to the contracts team from environment in terms of the concession if they're taking more than their 50%, so we can pick that up, and we're already picking up. Councillor Martin had already made us aware in terms of what you're being told and what space there is. I need to understand what they've got in there and what those options are. So we are picking that up to come back to you on those. And in terms of the traffic, the no waiting cones should be taking away some of that issue about being picked up. But I'm thinking if they're being stored in the shed, that might have created an issue as well as taking one away. And then some of the antisocial behaviour, I'll pick that up again to make sure that that's obviously our colleagues from public protection have gone, but just making sure that that's reported in if that's happening, and we'll make sure that the operator knows what they should be reporting in so that can be fed.
One other thing I haven't mentioned, amongst everything else, there's that you mentioned the bookings. Well, that isn't true, is it?
Which bit? Sorry.
The number of bookings.
Oh yes.
Completely
about the numbers that you're
inaccurate.
being given. Yeah. The market is not looking that healthy at all, and it's all crafters. And
certainly
it's
not 20 to 30
no,
artists booking in a.
No, and Sunday it's virtually empty.
Yeah.
I can pick that up with them and just get the stats
Anyway,
ratified.
that's another matter, but yeah.
Thank you. That was really useful. It's useful to know what's actually happening on the ground compared to what.
Yeah, if somebody, perhaps if you went to look at the shed, then you can see it's I think you thought it's beginning to sound like a TARDIS, this shed, but it's honestly the amount of space that the artists were using was so little. I can't see why we can't have it back. Anyway, but that would be useful if you.
But it is a safety valve. You can go and lock yourself in there if it becomes really threatening outside.
Make sure you can look out before you do that.
Yeah, can get enough from the fridges.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Thank you. So are there any other questions from the board?
Yeah, just to say, can we have an email report on what's happening? Because I feel quite strongly about it as well. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to these two women for coming here and giving us the background, because we, officers in particular probably don't hear. It's a bit like speaking to a shop assistant about what actually happens in the shop. If you speak to the manager, you get one story. If you speak to the shop assistant behind the cash desk, you'll hear another story. So it's really good, and I hope you realise now that you can be heard.
Well, we're very grateful. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Yeah. You've given us a bit of a voice, us oldies.
Yeah.
We've been told we've had it too good for so long. It's time they took over. Thanks.
No worries. Are there any other questions?
Alive.
Any other questions? No? Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So next steps, future meeting dates and work. Are there any questions from the board concerning any work we need to be doing, or any future what work we need to be doing? Is probably the first one to cover. Lawrence.
Sorry, it's me again. It's a long time between meetings, and I understand everybody's time is valuable. But can we have a monthly update by email on what progress on various bits and pieces?
Yeah, by exception, yeah. Most months there's obviously not a huge amount to report, but if you want items brought forward before, I can do that.
Is that all right with you, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay with you guys. Yeah. Do you think monthly, or do you think as there are issues coming up?
I think monthly, even if there's nothing to report, then at least we know it's being monitored.
Would the board like to give us some headings that you would like to see, items covered? Then we can.
That.
Yes, we've recorded
the lighting,
that as a formal
that
report
sort
to come
of
forward.
thing. It's ongoing work that we've discussed. That really, I think 3 months is a long time to wait to see how it got on.
Okay. But some themes would be useful.
So in terms of themes, then obviously Lawrence has picked up on lighting and the makers market. The other thing, I guess, is more of an MPT issue, but probably the safety has also come up and how people feel.
And as it happens, the Christmas market and Christmas lighting and the whatever goes on in the garden.
Best report for that is to get down there.
This is not on the agenda, but when you mention Christmas, does the the new offering for Christmas have to go through planning, and has it?
Yes, so the planning application has been submitted. So that's been submitted by the external operator for Christmas, and it's still waiting to be determined.
Will it have to come in front of the planning committee, do you think?
I don't know. I did try and get a feel for that today, but unfortunately I didn't get an update in time. So I'm not too sure, I'm afraid.
I think you'll find that if BCP does an application, it has to go to committee, doesn't it?
Yes, but it's not our application. It's an external applicant who's put the application in.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, so the future meeting dates, our next meeting's on the 26th of January 2026, and then the meeting after that is the 18th of May 2026.
If there's nothing else, I think it's appropriate. I'll close the meeting.